Before we go on to that, we have to make sure we give time to leading women of Africa to show a video about the organization, and then we'll go into the panelists. So please bear with us to learn about Leading Women of Africa group. All right, thank you so much for that presentation. And you all can become part of this movement by joining the social media handles, Leading Women of Africa, and contacting us that way. So we look forward to seeing you all get on board with the movement of Leading Women of Africa. So now our panelists. So let's start with Dr. Arthi Moore Roberts. Welcome, welcome, welcome.
Thank you so much for this beautiful welcome and to all the amazing people attending today. Greetings to all of our honorable guests, as well as our esteemed panelists. It's really incredible to see all of the things that they've done and achieved so far. It's fascinating. And so I think, just a little bit about my take on the G20. Just thank you for giving me the space to speak honestly, because after attending the G20 and listening to our president speak, I actually walked away with a heavy heart. I know that there's a lot of hype around how successful it was and how amazing it was. But for me, I look at things from a realistic point of view. I mean, I didn't feel inspired and I didn't feel reassured. I actually felt disheartened. And, there were many words, many promises, and many elegant statements. We've gotten used to that in Africa. I've gotten used to attending a lot of places where people they talk big stuff, but there's very little action. So when I looked at all of these elegant statements, there was very little clarity. I like to see what is not said. There was no real framework for change and absolutely no concrete plan for Africa moving forward. Now, I don't want to sound like I'm being negative here, but realistically, having listened to and attended a number of the G20 days, I just found that this is why Ubuntu diplomacy matters today, not as a philosophy, but as a demand. We need to be demanding courage. We need to demand accountability. And we need to demand for leadership with substance and not speeches. I think that most of the times we hear when there's been a lot said, but very little done. We need to actually look at where did South Africa mainstream Africa's priorities, And we need to be honest about it. We heard the right themes. South Africa actually successfully elevated the themes, but there was no concrete implementation pathways because that still remains very weak in my mind in what I experienced. We had the right themes around debt, around climate justice, around minerals, around youth and women. But in my line of work as a leadership strategist, what I found is that themes are not strategy, and strategy is not action. It's until we put all of these things into proper action that we actually start to get tangible results. What I thought into is that, according to the theme of what we're talking into, is Africa doesn't need another global microphone. What we need is implementation. And what I saw at the G20 was a failure of bold leadership. From everything that I've seen, what we need to prioritize needs to be mainstreamed. And if Africa's needs are going to be mainstreamed, then where were the mechanisms? Where were the timelines? Where was the accountability frameworks? I questioned even the financing commitments, all of the things that people were talking beautifully into. Where were the tangible pathways for ordinary Africans? So all of this just left me with more questions than answers. And people that I engaged with, and they told me all of the beautiful things that they are going to do, want to do, can do, the brilliant vision we've got for Africa, but nobody could actually pinpoint how are we going to do this and who is going to be responsible for it. And I think it's time that we actually started to speak plainly, because without the flowery language, what do we have? We cannot keep celebrating attendance while our continent keeps absorbing the consequences. Our reality is that on a day-to-day basis, people are suffering regardless. So all of these fancy things that are being said and done, and very little being done, shows that we are still on the receiving end of consequences. When I looked at part of the conversational theme for today's panel, it was talking about the AU's permanent position. I just feel that it means nothing without backbone. Africa finally has got a seat, and it's a powerful one. But a seat at the table is not influence. When we talk about influence, there needs to be impact. There needs to be tangible results. There needs to be guidelines, timelines, accountability. So when I look at a seat at the table without a unified African strategy, it's just merely a decoration, not a diplomacy. So what will we do with that seat at the table is going to talk volumes about how we pull together as an African continent. Look at our reality in South Africa. Xenophobia is one of the biggest things, and we keep quiet about it. But here we're talking about a unified African voice. And what I think about politics is that there's a lot that is said that doesn't talk into our reality. And we need to be cognizant of that. So when we talk about a unified African strategy, what we need is a single African voice, not 54 fragmented positions. We need negotiators who walk in with non-negotiables. That means we've got to have strength in our voice. We've got to have power and clarity in what we're asking for and demand, not just accept and roll over and say, well, you know what, people are giving us handouts and we got used to it for too long. We also need an African development blueprint that works, and it needs to be presented at every single summit that actually talks into accountability. Because when we look at this, we need to have the courage to hold global powers accountable and make it public if needed. Because when we talk about Ubuntu diplomacy is not something that's passive. It's not something that is soft. It's part of our African culture and our African nature. It's second nature to us. But the problem is we allow a lot of people to walk all over us. Ubuntu says, I see your humanity, right? We are because of each other. But it does not mean that we've got to compromise who we are because of it. A lot of people misinterpret Ubuntu because it's been another word that's been abused over the years, and it has been dumbed down. It just keeps getting brought up when it is acceptable, or when people actually want to use it across lots of nations, even across Africa. But what's our reality as South Africans? Do we actually show that to our fellow Africans? But here we're sitting in the seat of power with the ability to actually speak on behalf of Africa. So when you talk about the truth, what it is, it's like we've seen this movie before. It's big speeches, bold visions, and then silence. Africa cannot afford another year of commitment without commitment. if you know what I'm saying. What we need is binding targets. What we need is a strategy that actually makes sense. When we look at the financial tracking tools, it's non-existent. There's a lot that's been spoken about. I mean, I made loads and loads of notes when I was at the G20. And there's a lot of things that's just not adding up for me. The words and the actions are not matching up for me. When we look at it, we actually need independent oversight and we need a collaborative way of thinking across all of our African continents. When will we do that? When will our African leaders come together and actually have that unified voice that I'm talking into? We need the youth and women in the monitoring councils because that is where our youth and women can be used more in terms of their skills, their ability, their knowledge, their know-how, and they're coming with a clean, fresh vision, a clean, fresh impact, a clean, fresh way of looking at things out of the box, not the same old thinking that's always been there. And when we look at it, there's mostly the same decision makers, the same people coming around the table, but they're talking about having a different vision, but they're not having a diverse team of people talking into it, which makes me wonder, what is their whole thing around diversity? We have to have a public scorecard. In the same way, we've got professional scorecards for organizations. You got to tick the box of accountability, your KPIs. We have that for organizations. Why can't we have that for the G20? We no longer need to be sitting in that position where we hear these beautiful words of we will consider, we will create frameworks, we are exploring. Those are just words. That there's nothing tangible about those words, there's nothing definitive, and there's nothing intentional about it. So I think that beyond our G20, Africa needs to stop negotiating from a place of politeness. We keep saying thank you out of gratitude, and we should always have gratitude. I'm not discounting gratitude. I'm saying be grateful always for the people that we have around us, for the things that we are surrounded with, and for what is coming. But you do not have to sit there in politeness and just accept blandly or gullibly. We cannot sit in innocence and say we did not know. We need to raise our awareness. We need to raise our thinking. Because when you look at it, Ubuntu is not meekness, it's a strength. Why don't we use that strength on a different level? So when we look at it, for me, Ubuntu is truth wrapped in compassion. I talk about creating compassionate leaders of influence. For me, that is what Ubuntu means. It's truth wrapped in compassion. So the way we collaborate and connect with our African counterparts, with our different communities, with the people who are really battling and suffering, I'm talking about how do we hold everybody around us accountable after all of the leaders have gone, after they have gone back to their countries, after things have been exchanged and all of these declarations have been made. Who is holding them accountable? Because when you think about it, what does Africa have to bring to the world that they do not have? They're dependent on us, but we're saying thank you for the handouts for too long. What we hold in our grasp and what we have control over is those minerals they're talking about for powering this green transition. I saw SDG goals flying past. There's a lot there. Even AGOA, women in technology, in STEM industries, in all of these areas, we can actually bring a different way of thinking of how to use the minerals within Africa to power that green transition they're talking about. When you look at the demographics, we are sitting with the hugest future workforce. We have youth on this call. We have youth development partners who are going to be panelists, and they can actually speak deeply into this because they are spoken about, but they're not included in policies and development of everything that should be including them, but they're not. When you look at renewable energy capacity of global sustainability, we're sitting with the best climate for all of these interventions and inventions. There's incredible mindsets, incredible thinking and intelligence sitting in Africa. We're sitting with so much gold in the thinking of the people across Africa. And when you look at the agricultural potential to feed markets, there's massive projects going around at the moment. Jan Roberts is on the call at the moment, and he is working behind the scenes with many, many African countries, talking into this on a very deep level. So what I'm saying is that Africa needs to stop acting like a beneficiary. Africa is a global partner with leverage, and it's time the world actually experiences us that way. So, as someone who sat in the room during the G20, I realized something very important. We cannot wait for global structures to validate Africa's worth. We must define it ourselves. Ubuntu diplomacy is Africa's leadership gift to the world, but only if we practice it with courage and not caution. We need to stop apologizing for breathing as Africans. And my hope after that summit was that it wasn't in the speeches made, it's that the people who are willing to challenge the status quo, the people who refuse to accept symbolic wins, the people who demand results, the people who are ready to lead with compassion and conviction, those are the people who are going to be the implementers. And I know that there are a lot of people sitting on this panel who have been there and they are doing the work. They have got a lot to offer. And my final thoughts is that if Africa stands united, unapologetic, and anchored in Ubuntu, we won't just sit at the G20 table, we'll shift the agenda on it. And that was my take on G20. Thank you for listening.
Thank you. So we started with some real authenticity. So this is where we're starting. So no one can go back from here. Thank you so much, Dr. Roberts. So next is Dr. Ahunsi. Please, your recap of the G20 Summit. Welcome.
Thank you. Yeah, it's amazing to be here, to be with all of you today. So, what I have here, information I have here for the global audience in terms of this participation is the story which I've just, or like the quote which I've just mentioned. But the story I want to tell is something that happened back in 1963. That was on the street of Washington, D.C. Some of you may have remembered all of that. Yeah, a movement that actually changed the global silence of how the minority can be treated. And Martin Luther King Jr. actually once mentioned, he said, the greatest enemy is for you to remain silent and not to be a participant. So I think with everybody here, it is time for Africa to be a participant, not just a passive mover in the world stage. Why Africa? Why do they need that voice? Well, Africa is a home of over 1 billion people. That's a lot of people, and that's a lot of market. Even Africa internally can trade within itself. As the previous speaker mentioned, we are not beggars. We are actually provider and sustainer of the global wealth. Yes, African product and African talents are world class. I think is it a household just mentioned it earlier, being United States as an Africa, more educated, well talented, been to so many different. Why should we be hiding away with all these opportunities and the possibility that we have in the world stage? Africa dominates the mineral and other natural resources. Every single structure, every single home, every single machinery that had ever been produced, part of those particulars and the minerals and the ingredient that were used, which are a part of the component, were actually drawn from the land of Africa. Africa is a world next economic frontier. Make no mistake, but the leader need to be able to stand right. They need to be able to stand for what is right, not just indulging in their own silent, drunk in position as if they're drunk, not knowing what is actually happening. What Nelson Mandela in his words called failed leadership. If I could just allow me to quote this Noam Chomsky, he's saying that there are no poor countries, only failed systems for managing resources. Isn't that the case with Africa? It is not because Africa is poor Yeah, I've challenged many people in various conferences when they make derogatory remark about Africa. I said, no, Africa is not poor. Keep quiet. Take that out of your head. Yes, it is poorly managed. That's a fundamental difference. And this is what Noam is actually making a reference to, that Africa is not a poor place, but the system have failed the inhabitant and the Commonwealth beneficiary of that particular continent. So is there a time that Africa need to rise up? And people need to rise up. Yes, we can see from all the various corners and the telltale sign that a lot of movement are actually taking place with the young people and people in the diaspora, and even within the African themselves. Some of the leaders are now actually have woken up from the slumber they have been in. Yes, it's about time. And the time is now that Africa should be able to. So, what are the principles of Ubuntu? Well, it is because you are. Wow, isn't that amazing? So, it's a philosophy, it's a way of life which is connected to humanity, unity, compassion, and mutual responsibility. Yes, as a nation or nations of people in Africa, they actually own that responsibility. They need that interconnectedness, even within themselves. Because if you have the fire within, it's actually more dangerous than the fire from the outside camp, outside the camp. You agree with me, don't you? Yeah. Ubuntu actually reminds of a nation that flourishes when others flourish. Yes, diplomacy must build relationships, not dominance. Well, that's what I call the Western. Yeah, people call it the colonial master, but I don't use that phrase. It's not a master, but more like invaders. Why would you like invader to actually dominate and trample upon your own sovereignty? Why for so long? Why do we not taking the mantle within ourselves and deal decisively as leaders? Because leaders are those who actually fight for their own people. They do for their people what their people cannot do for themselves. Yes, this is what it's all about. So leadership must therefore, in the African context, require that commitment and not about selfishness, not about gaining the next political position. But that's what the settle code is at the moment. Ubuntu, therefore, in the African continent, human dignity, cooperation, strategic interdependence. And that's what it's all about. That should be the way forward. A leader need to appreciate and do exactly just that. How about diplomacy in the sense? Well, was it not Mahatma Gandhi that actually once mentioned that it is the principles of fighting without a gun? Well, Africa has a lot of ammunitions. Africa has a lot of resources that they can use to fight in terms of their diplomatic negotiations. Should not be in a position of having a weaker or a very weak, feeble, beggarly position, but a position of, yes, dominance in a sense that we play as an equal partner. That's what the African leaders need. Sitting on the GS table, yes, sitting is good, but team participation is always required right now. Team representation for the real people. Team advocacy. Yes, why do you need to advocate? Yeah, you need to advocate because you're leaders. And advocacy represents the ability for you to be able to negotiate on behalf or in behalf of other people who are not able to position themselves. The African leader, the time is now right. It is time right now for them to be able to do that, to negotiate, go for a dialogue, meaningful relationship between all the nations, not in a beggarly seat that doesn't. Well, as we already mentioned, Africa must confront the drawback they have: failed leadership, weak and failed system. Well, the word C, I mean, with capital letter, that need to be, yeah, addressed right from the grassroots. Not just the people, the politicians on their desks, but even the real people at the grassroots. How is this one? What message do we actually have to deliver to the people, the African continent origin, that we have the capability and we can build a system that is sustainable, a system that cater for the commonwealth of all the people, a system that promotes collaborative management in the process. Yes, we all have that responsibility. We all have that to participation. We all have, as a diverse people, like this is a story I was telling you earlier, diverse but converse at the same time. That was a part of the marches back in 1963, where Martin Luther King Jr. says, silence is not the answer. And in fact, he had a dream, but that dream is coming true incrementally. But we are way, way behind in terms of what it is. So the time has come where those sitting on the table in terms of making a decision for us is so important. So why the diplomacy and why is it the way forward? Well, it is a way forward because when you sit idle without doing anything, other people will make the decision for you. And this is exactly what is happening. So prioritization of negotiation, not fragmented into 54 different plans and states, but a united. So what's the purpose of AU, African unity? What's the purpose of ECOWAS? What's the purpose of the East African? All of these are all disjointed in so many different ways, but can we come strategically together integratively and having that strategic interdependence, African within the Africa itself, even before it spread out externally, is that a possibility? How about the leadership situation? And what are the goals? What are the ideologies that what we have in terms of technology? Do we have any African country that has to say, yeah, in 10 years' time, we want to be known for technological this, technological that? Highly fragmented and brain drain is the order of the day. But it is now time for us to now achieving brain gain in the process. So even we in the diaspora need to be able to rethink. Yeah, opportunities and possibilities may not be given to you by the power that are in at that point in time, but through the storm and through inclemency of the weather, God has given us the right umbrella to cope, not stopping the rain. So he's giving us the brain, giving us the people. Yeah, this is a strong umbrella we need in order to be able to withstand the very difficult, challenging situation in the African environment. Yes, Africa need the narrative and the dignity, the sovereignty that they required, not beggarly, not honky down when we need to face the real decision making. So on my final note, and this is what it is, and this is fundamental, this message not only be kept on this particular, for those of you in position of authority, take it to the 54 leaders, countries, and the people in general, that in the spirit of Ubuntu, humanity is intertwined with our progress if our progress is shared. That's what it's all about. African voice is not optional. African seat is not a favor. Africa's leadership is not negotiable. Yes, should be part and intertwined, integrated into the fabric of the world decision making because we have the resources. We are well positioned. We are well endowed in human, in natural resources, in fertility of our land, and many, many other. If resources are not well deployed, then somebody else will use them and possibly even have them wasted. The world needs Africa's wisdom, power, resources, youth, and vision. Isn't that really amazing? This is what we stand for as Africa. And this is what the whole point is all about as Africa. Yeah, my name is Dr. Sonia Hansi. I'm a practicing functional medicine practitioner based here in the UK. And when I see a lot of things that's actually happening, going to Africa, and some of the things that were not really, then you begin to question yourself. Yes, we want to be positioned, not only helping people in terms of political diplomacy, but also in terms of health. And this is one of my driving forces, delivering healthcare system with any medical intervention that people may have. And right now, my motion is to go to Africa, create a lot of doctors in a functional way, and also helping people to develop around their own businesses. So satisfying two things, two needs of people. Those two needs are fundamental. Without those two needs, no one will survive. Health and wealth. So I hope this has been an amazing one. So going back to the original quote, indecision is the greatest enemy. African leader must decide now and be a participant actively, effectively, and not just a docile listener sitting on the table.
Thank you so much, Dr. Alhunsi in the UK. So now we're going to Queen Tina Bella Boats to give us your recap. Welcome, welcome, welcome.
Good morning. Yes, it is still good morning. Good morning to all delegates and speakers, and thank you for introduction. Today I'm speaking as a mere concerned citizen of South Africa and a servant of God instead of any of my related positions, okay? So I'm going to go from the top and say, did South Africa successfully mainstream Africa's priorities into the G20 agenda? Now, what I did, I looked at the AI version and I thought to myself, but you know, if this is what AI has out there, there's a lot of people thinking it and putting it onto the mainstream. So a lot of people are thinking and looking at AI. That's one of the things that irritates me in any case, but we have to use it. And so a lot of beliefs are out there that are not true. All right. Now, South Africa's, I'm just going to recap a small bit of that AI so that you can know where I come from. South Africa's G20 presidency, the first ever on African soil, placed the continent's development challenges at the heart of global discussions. Listen to what it says, at the heart of global discussions under the theme of solidarity, equality, and sustainability. Key achievements and areas of focus included, and then they go on to include some areas. Now, solidarity, I've taken it one by one now. Solidarity, my question is, whose solidarity is our presidency advocating for? I'm from South Africa. Okay. Number two, equality. For 30 years, there have been no equality as yet in South Africa. In fact, there are more racism, more violence, gender-based and otherwise, and more impoverished people than ever. What form of equality is that? Okay. Sustainability. If we call what is happening in our country as stability, then I have the wrong idea of what a stable country and the government must look like. I'm sorry. In terms of the focus areas of what our presidency, take note that it specifically calls it the presidency. So people are talking about the presidency as this magic thing working together for world peace or something. Take note, that excludes the rest of the governments and people involved in the G20 Summit. And there were a lot of people in the G20 Summit. Some of my friends were there, or some people that I know very well went to the G20 Summit, hoping that they would get a reaction from the president. They did not. They weren't even seen. And they were invited. They were invited. Okay. The following are noted. African Union, the AU permanent seat. South Africa strongly advocated for and secured the AU's permanent membership in the G20, formalizing Africa's ongoing voice in global economic governance. Now, I'm sure any president of South Africa, given the chance, would be able to do the same. As it seems, and any presidency, any government, as it seems to me, the most important thing for our presidency is the governance of Africa. Listen to what I'm saying today. Now, the things that they say here, some of the things that they give here that are key points for the South African in the G20 Summit were debt sustainability. The presidency established an Africa expert panel to address the continent's significant debt burden and advocated for reform of the global financial architecture to provide fairer debt treatment mechanisms for low-income countries. Good. So my answer to that is, do I really want to comment on this? Yes, he might have done all these things, but listen carefully. Our country is one of the countries in the world with the most debt and growing. How can he speak on something like this? How can he advocate for that if he can't even contain South Africa's debt? I'm sorry, this is how I feel at the moment. Then, climate and energy. Now I'm just handling the key points. I'm not an expert on climate change and clean energy, but what I can truly say is what we must start going back to the Bible. Read what is prophesied by Jesus, our Christ, and also in Revelations. Then tell me again that there is a global warming. Yes, it's getting warmer, but it's all been prophesied already. We must actually start looking beyond the global warming if we are sincerely and honestly worrying about the people. For the Lord says, pray that your flight may not come in the winter. And that is what's going to happen. We're all focusing on global warming. We're not realizing, but beyond global warming, there is something that's going to be left behind. What then? That is our problem, not global warming. Yes, we must address global warming, but we must focus on the future. Okay, transition financing, I'm not going to go through all that. Then the other question was, how can the African Union's new permanent seat in the G20 be used effectively post-summit? Post-summit. To me, all this has been a great plan of certain role to me. Remember, I'm talking as a mere citizen, a concerned citizen. Been a great plan of certain role players to get America away from this summit. Now I can hear people say, America, okay, Trump. I can see how the presidency can benefit from this in the absence of USA. So I do not know about the African Union. To me, it seems like it has been a hijacked by the presidency, in brackets, presidencies. Why do I say that? We are standing in front of a government election, a local government election in South Africa in a couple of months, maybe a year. I'm not going to say any more about that. Next question, what policy follow-up mechanisms can ensure implementation of G20 commitments? Now, I might sound negative, but amongst everyone that hails the G20, I do not think it was an absolute success. The small man and the impoverished do not form part of these plans. It is all about presidencies and governments. Those people were on the summit and they didn't get a chance. Why? Only the ideas were taken and put into the governments. There's a reason for that. I'll come to that just now. Beyond G20, how can Africa speak as one in a global economic governance going forward? The only way, to my opinion, that government can speak, that Africa can speak as one in global economic governance, meaning the new world order, and that brings me back to the last comment. I would rather say voice instead of governance going forward, is by including Africans to firstly take the continental issues to heart. And we do, the Africans does. That is what this is all about Africa and the people in Africa. speaking as Africans and not governments. The New World Order has been on the books for hundreds of years, hundreds, and planned through, even if it's not thousands, and planned throughout all the times. It is not going to stop, not for us or for anyone. And somehow I believe that this is not such a good thing for the impoverished. If you look at the real side of the story. Okay, then the last question was, actually that was the last question. Now, I just want to say in conclusion, I don't think that any presidency can govern any other entity successfully if your own country's governance is falling by the wayside. Therefore, always remember, charity starts at home, and our country needs it more than ever. And it is a fact that our Almighty God demands unity and order. I rest my case with it. Thank you for the opportunity.
So thank you again. All right, Ambassador Carlos Boachi, our youth representative, please take the stand and let us know G20.
Our speakers have said a lot, and right now I'm angry. Like I'm really angry, and I'm angry because Africa needs to wake up. Respect is not given, bro. Like respect is not given. Why are we begging them to respect us? They won't respect us. Let me give you some facts, especially from our last speakers. I see the G20 summit, the theme of it to be problematic, because if you're talking about solidarity, why do you end it with disrespect? If you're talking about inclusion, why does it have to always be like Africa? Let me quote Trump's statements. It seems like some people didn't hear what Trump said. What he said was that South Africa being part of the G20 was a mistake, and South Africa shouldn't be part of the G20. And he went further. He went further to block South Africa for attending the next G20 summit. Yes, the next G20 summit that is happening in Miami, South Africa won't be attending, not because President Ramaphosa doesn't want to attend, but United States is lobbying the G7 to make sure that South Africa is kicked out from the G20. And they are not joking. Why? Because this whole thing with the United States didn't start from the G20. It started when African heads of state started calling a representation in our multilateral space. It started when African leaders started calling for a permanent seat at the UN. It started when Africans started calling for the head of the IMF to be Africa. It started when the head of Africa started calling a representation in the World Bank loan grant ratio. They have been continuously, systematically blocking us and verbally disrespecting us. And we are here asking for respect. I'm calling for sanctions. Why is the AU in there in the first place? AU right now, if I was the head of the AU right now, I'll be calling for an emergency heads of state meeting with all our countries to sanction the United States companies that are exploiting our resources on the continent, for them to know that they shouldn't mess up with us going forward. But we are here talking about they need to cooperate, respect. Come on, they're not going to respect us. They've been saying it for a decade. So my biggest issue is that it all boils down why the United States doing this. This fight started even before Trump gained power. It started when Biden was in power, and then the African Union initiated a global representation of Africa. That was when, at that time, I remember, because I was part of the Security Council briefing. I was within the same room with the Ministers of Defense. So I saw what happened. And the AU drafted a resolution to make sure that the African representation in the UN spaces were represented. But what happened? What we saw was that the United States, all the P5, the permanent five, agreed for Africa to have a permanent seat at the Security Council, except the United States. The United States came in and said, no, they vetoed us to have a permanent seat at the Security Council. Why? They said Africa is not equipped enough to have a seat at the Security Council. They said Africa can be part of the Security Council. The AU can represent, or they will give us 2 seats, but they won't give us veto power. Why are they doing this? I see this as systematic blockade. I don't see it as G20. In fact, I'll congratulate President Ramaphosa for his resilience, because this thing I could have gone even way worse. His determination to get this thing up. He didn't matter whatever the other countries' leaders were saying. His resilience and determination to get things through showed the respected African need. But I see the AU just being silenced. What is the AU doing in the G20 in the first place? They are, because we need to have a unilateral voice, a one solid voice. But what I keep on seeing is that when Trump does stuff, zero silence. But when African leader does something, boom, the whole world hears about it. You're telling me, especially this during the G20, what happened in Nigeria, Trump, he didn't even diplomat. He directly insulted the Nigerian government of their inability to address security. He said that disgraced country. How do you use such a statement for a sovereign state that you want to cooperate with? And AU, what did the AU do? Silence. I'm playing I don't become a head of state one day, because for me, I can't continue on this level of disrespect. The day you disrespect us, that's the day we cut you off from our trade blocks. That is the day we cut you from the export canal. You know, Egypt is very vital to the global shipping route. We block all vessels coming from the United States, that you are not passing through the canal until you start respecting us. Because we don't need to ask for respect. We need to gain respect. But how do you ask for respect? Why is that Trump keep on, always the United States keep on disrespecting? It's because of productivity. Let's talk about FAT here. What is the economic output of the continent? The last time I checked, it was 3.4 trillion. The entire economic output, GDP output of the entire continent, 3.4, 3.2, similar around that range, trillion. Out of having 54 states, only 5 countries contribute 50% of Africa's GDP. Think about it. Only 5 countries contribute 50% of African GDP. So why won't they disrespect us? Why? Because when it comes to productivity, in fact, Chicago alone produced more than the entire continent. Right? So, what is the population of the United States? Around 300 million. What is the population of Africa? 2.4 billion. 70% of the 2.4 billion are young people. So you're telling me you have a bunch of people on this continent, and yet the only economic output they can produce is 3.4 trillion, whilst one state in the United States alone produce more than the entire continent of Africa. So why wouldn't they disrespect us? Why wouldn't they? Because, come on, when I've been in these rooms, they are not telling us to be in the seat because we are many or because we are Africa. They are looking at, okay, what can we solve when it comes to global issues? Speaking about the African Union, 70% of the African Union budget come from external donors. What do you expect when they take money from them? They will definitely tell them what to do with the money. A lot of people are telling me, AU needs to speed up, AU needs to do this, but where are they getting the money from? What is the budget of the African Union? It's not even up to $1 billion. It's $600 million. Yet 70% of that $600 million come from external donors. You have 54 countries. They can't even raise $1 billion for the African Union to be doing its work. We need to talk up. So when they continue disrespecting us, it's not a matter of, okay, we need to cooperate with Africa. No. It comes with productivity. I remember at the Security Council, we are calling a permanent representation at the Security Council and Africa, but our security issues are the poorest. Our military are poorly equipped. Our police system are the most corrupt you could think of. And we are calling to be represented over there. They don't see us. They don't see the need for us. In fact, 50% of the global crisis at the Security Council resolution are on Africa, not Ukraine, are on Africa. Why? Yet we want our voice. Okay, they said, okay, fine. But what do you bring to the table? What do you bring? Let me tell you what the United States brings to the table. 80% of or 40% of the consumable markets in the world are being handled by the United States. So yes, when they say they don't want to buy your goods, you're going to be affected. Until we'll start looking inward to fix our systematic blockage problems, they are not going to respect us. And we should stop begging them for them to include us. They don't need us. Trust me, I've been at this high-level state, this high-level thing. I think we are their biggest problem. They even wanted to get rid of us. Because we are so many, they don't even know how to contain us. We have so much abundance of resources. 80% of the world resources are in Africa. And yet we still go to the United States for aid. I once hosted a high-level youth dialogue with our policymakers. I invited a lot of high dignitaries of the African Union, including the Commissioner for Health, the head of security councils, and all of these leaders. I invited the former president of Ethiopia and the rest. And I told them, we need to stop letting the AU function like a charity organization. You see how the Europeans are doing it with their EU? EU doesn't need the countries to contribute to the EU fund. EU got its own euros. EU got its own payment. EU got its own framework. So EU can give money to its countries and even give some to Africa, because what does it take to make money? You just print it. They are giving us a piece of paper in exchange of real gold. And it seems like we prefer the piece of paper than the gold we have in our soil. So for me, I'm furious already, like I'm boiling up. And because I had this conversation with Dr. Ngozana Zuma, the former chairperson of the African Union, just this Sunday. We had a very intensive conversation, private conversation about this. And I asked her, so Your Excellency or Mommy, when you were in the African Union, what were some of the challenges you faced? And the final conversation ended up with mindset. A summary of our conversation ended up with mindset. You know, African Union always boasts of the Agenda 2063. Thanks to her that the Agenda 2063 works. I was furious to find out, you know, when you speak with a lot of Pan-Africanism, they talk like as if the leaders doesn't know what they are doing. They talk like, oh, Africa needs to have a one passport to promote trade. African unions needs to create flight zones, easy flight zones. African Union needs to create one trade bloc like the AFTA. Guess what? They already exist. It already exists at the AU level. Yes, I was so impressed when I started working with NEPAD about this thing. I went in, I was like, we need to have one African passport. Guess what? When Dr. Zuma was in power, they signed a treaty to have one passport for Africa so that it will be easier for us to move. They signed a treaty to integrate African economy. That is why they established the AFTA. They even set up the Pan-African Payment Settlement. So those things still exist. The framework for having a united one African currency already exists. The African Union did all those things. In fact, I have a bunch of documents. I could show it to you for you to see. These leaders literally went and signed all these things. What happened? Why are we still talking about African passports? Why are we still talking about trade? Because AU only makes policies. They make the policies. It's up to your countries to pick it up and implement. Today, just walk to your foreign affairs and says, okay, I need an African passport. They are supposed to be issuing it to you. Some of the elite has it. Aliko Dangote has an African Union passport. Yes, there are one for African Union staff and there's one for business and trade. But why isn't the countries cooperating to implement what they already went inside? Politics. They will, I remember Ambassador Khaled will tell you, Carlos, politics. Our countries are not cooperating, they are competing. That is our problem. Instead of us to look inward, instead of all of us to come together, let's say today you are the head of state or you are the head of the African Union, and you got furious, like the way I'm furious about what the United States did, and you want to sanction the countries, and you call for an emergency meeting, and you tell the countries to implement it. They will come and agree with you. But closed doors, Libya is having a bilateral deal with the United States. Instead of Ghana is already having a bilateral trade with the United States. So by the time you realize they agreed, but they are engaging with them one-on-one, and they will tell you that that is a bilateral relations, not a multilateral relations. You see the politics over there? Yeah. Just last 2 weeks, I was in Morocco, and we wanted to go, and they requested for a passport. So I had some of our delegates from the African Union to join us, and I gave them African Union passport. Guess what? We were rejected for hosting an official African Union passport. Morocco. And I asked, for me, I always ask because I'm a young leader, why? And they will give you a bunch of excuses. The countries haven't ratified the African Union passport. I'm like, what? So what the heck are you even doing in the African Union in the first place? So it turns out that some countries are there just for spying for some Western powers. So we need to systematically look inward to fix our internal issues first before we even go and ask them for inclusion and representation. Because what it takes to bring the United States back on its new is just sanction on our mineral resources. That is what we need to do right now. Like literally right now, Trump will reverse his decision. Immediately AU goes like, okay, we are going to sanction the United States for disrespecting South Africa during the G20, and we are going to sanction them for a period of just 1 month. Just 1 month. A period of 1 month until they release an apology. Trust me, Trump will just come out and apologize. Do you know why I'm saying this? Because Mali did it. When the United States placed 100,000 visa fines on Malians, Mali didn't ask for, oh, United States needs to respect us. They didn't issue a statement. What did they do? They repressed. They copied them and issued the same visa cost to the United States. Why? They targeted the business people because United States have companies that are mining resources in Mali. So those people are very interested people to protect. So what did the United States do? The next day, they changed the decision. They reversed the decision. They will only respect you when you show them how powerful you are. Do you think they respect China? Come on, they don't respect China. Look at the US-China trade war tension. What did China did? China didn't ask for inclusion. China didn't host summit about how the United States needs to respect China. China said, okay, fine, we control 80% of rare earth minerals. Taiwan is under our control. Your military needs equipment, chips. So what do? We place sanctions on you. The next day, US was complaining. China can't do this. Trump released a whole almost 500 texts about why China needs to reverse that decision. China didn't ask for respect. China didn't ask for cooperation. China played their own game. So until we start learning the game they play, we will be, because one thing, especially when I was in Morocco, one of the things that we were working with the African Union was on reparation. We've been talking about reparation for reparative justice for quite some time. And then I saw African Union taking it to the ICC for especially on climate justice. And then I saw AU celebrating that now the ICC have ruled out. Guess what? The United States doesn't even recognize the ICC. Are you aware of that? So you took your stuff to the ICC for justice, but the US will tell you we don't even know the ICC. So they are not even going to respect you. Well, let's wake up and stop. Let's stop with the talkings. Africa, we like talking too much. So for me, I'm furious why I'm not seeing the AU and South Africa playing the sanction card. That is what I'm furious. Because we keep on asking for respect. They are not going to respect us. They have not been respecting us since ages. So do you think what will let them change for them to respect us? You think we are so many? So they have to respect? Nah, come on. We need to play their game. We need to equip our military. We need to equip our own unilateral bloc. We need to The AFTA is the largest trade bloc after the World Trade Organization. We need to make sure that we internalize and also empower young people. Right now, I'm wrapping up very short. Right now, we have 70% of the young people on this continent, but there's no framework to empower them. There's no financial allocation to give to the next entrepreneurs. You go into big high-level rooms, and what you see is the big people are taking the money and they are splitting among their companies, but they are not allocating the funds for the next generation. And that is why this December we are hosting the Africa Rise Youth International Summit. And the summit will be in Johannesburg coming this December on the 11th to 13th at the VAT Business School. And we want to have these conversations. We really want to engage with the youth in South Africa and address these challenges, because the voice of the young people are always underrepresented. They don't even value us, but we need to fight. And Kenyan proved it. But at what cost? At what cost? 38 young people died in Kenya. You keep on empowering us. Let's empower the young people. At what cost, please? So these are what we are trying to coalesce us and hold them accountable. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. Dr. Ella Ford Mtetwa, you are up. Please give us your recap of the G20 Summit. Welcome, welcome, welcome.
Thank you so much. Firstly, I'd just like to say congratulations to you and the ladies and the team for just putting together and spearheading the initiative that you are spearheading. It's really good to see that our women out there globally and fellow Africans are coming through and making a change and making a difference, a meaningful difference within the African space. Yeah, so after all that, my perspective is quite different in the sense that I come from a position of optimism first. And then I always say, then it's subtracted. It's almost like a bank account that is subtracted. So I start from a position of optimism. And this is sort of the going in position in terms of my involvement within the G20 space. Yes, I do believe that it was a historic event. It was a truly historic event. We can't take that away as a milestone, a historic milestone for Africa. Because in my old, in my old sort of personality, I was also in my old life. I was a reputation management specialist, and I do believe that the hosting the G20 summit has done something for Africa in terms of credibility, and just also elevating the position of the philosophy of Ubuntu from being commoditized to being something that we can leverage, truly now leverage on, because I've been in corporate spaces where Ubuntu has been sort of abused. The philosophy of Ubuntu has been abused for the benefit of these global corporates. So for now, within the G20 space, I found that we owned it. We took the opportunity to own it. And so using Africa's moral philosophy of Ubuntu, because we always was I think was very genius. And it did sort of give us an opportunity to shape our own destiny in somewhat. And that's why I say that my reflections are quite mixed, in the sense that when I went into the discussions, because my involvement in within the G20 space was in two spaces. The first one was around women, in the working groups leading up to the G20 summit, and also in the children's space, because I also serve as the chairperson of Childline South Africa Foundation, and I see firsthand the experience, the overt experiences that our children and our women are still, exposed on. And I chose to participate, and I chose to participate based on and to commit personally, based on the fact that it was the G20 summit was based on that very spirit of Ubuntu, and that's what guided my participation throughout. But what also guided my participation, because I asked myself, what would success look like for me in terms of participation. And being involved in civil society, for me, the success for me was making concrete improvements in the lives of ordinary South Africans. And that's why I chose to be involved in the social summit. Because yes, the G20 Summit, BRICS, where I'm also a participant and I lead in the healthcare space, is very much also leans very much also towards economic policy. However, the social side of the social elements, the real matters that that require championing of human dignity, protection, opportunity, and equity become invisible with this high level diplomacy. And it doesn't take care of the realities that we deal with when we deal with women, children, workers, entrepreneurs on the ground, and vulnerable communities. And that's what sort of, drove my participation within the G20 summit. Yeah. And when I speak about the optimistic side of things in terms of what I believed worked, because I asked myself, what do I believed worked? And one of them was the elevation of the South African brand equity, because when you, or the equity of Africa as a whole, because equity is important in the sense of you're going in position when it comes to negotiation. Because like the previous speakers have already indicated, Africa has been regarded as almost like a stepchild, or almost like a continent or a country, as some would say, that is riddled with poverty, and it requires handouts, and so forth. But this was an opportunity for us to, as Africa, showcase our strength, our professionalism, and so forth. And even within the declaration, the declarations itself, there were key elements that are directly related to Africa that were highlighted in terms of energy poverty, in terms of debt sustainability, in terms of the issues around food security. And more important for me was the bold discussion around critical minerals. The fact that as South Africans, we are a source, but we don't really benefit from the minerals that and the riches of Africa. And it's these other countries that benefit from these. So from the positive side, those are the elements that I believe sort of worked for Africa. But from the on the other side, I really do share the sentiment of the previous speakers, the previous panelists, in terms of the fact that, without sounding like a broken record, in terms of the fact that not much was seen in terms of what the implementation framework will be post the G20 summit. Yes, within the working groups, there are specific projects that were put in place, that were set in place, and that need to be that needs to be followed through and implemented. But the big reality is that the biggest downfall for me for the G20 summit is that it's not binding. There's no binding power and commitment is voluntary. So we can take these fancy G20 declarations and publish them and speak on them. However, they're not binding. And I've seen this in other spaces that I've been in, where, for example, the BRICS spaces that I've been in, where there are major challenges in terms of implementation because it's not binding. So the project starts on a high note. And then when it comes to implementation, because there's no follow through, they fizzle out. And then it's almost as if it's like a cycle. Then the next G20 comes, then the next BRICS comes, and there are more declarations that come through. But we don't see what for me looks like success, which is impact on the ground, grassroots impact, because that's where my passion lies. Then the other downfall for me is the consistent geopolitical tensions that undermine the collective action of the G20 summit. Because without collaboration, without consistent, working together, without that, then the declarations, it becomes a fragmented sort of effort, because the declarations without commitments and collaborations, then the likelihood of achieving an seamless implementation is really diminished. So for me, that is really becomes an issue. There's this power imbalance, where some of the global voices perceive themselves as, it's almost like animal farm. They perceive themselves as the better global citizens than the others, and that unfortunately is a long-standing issue that requires the mindset change that my panelists were speaking about. We need that complete mindset change in order for us to be able to ensure that there's a seamless implementation. And there's also, and I mean, during the discussions as well, what I also found was that I found that there were certain inconsistencies. I had a very similar experience as the very first speaker, where I started off from a very high bank account, like I said, my positive bank account, and which was withdrawn as I kept on going from session to session during the G20 summit, because I saw that there was a lot of inconsistencies across host countries, but also inconsistencies within the working groups themselves. So, although the declaration itself is a very polished document, it's not as seamless as it sounds. And I see there the Eagles mentioned that there's no youth focus. I witnessed and I went into a session where the youth was extremely unhappy, because what they felt like was that their inclusion within the G20 summit seemed to be a tick box exercise. So there's also a lot of that tick box exercise, where we've had the summit, we've included all these marginalized communities, for example, the Khoisan and so forth, which is good, because a lot of people only know the Khoisan for what happened to Sarah Bartman, but they were able to be there. But were they really given the platform to really truly voice out their issues and their challenges, and were there concrete solutions for the issues that they experience on a daily basis? And I know that as a panel, we might sound as if we are coming with questions rather than answers. But I always believe that it's a good position to be in when you're able to remove the bandage and you're able to see the wound and interrogate and give a true diagnosis from a point of authenticity and a point of honesty, so that we can really see what the true issues are in our countries, in Africa. Because if they are sugar coated, then we have a much bigger issue. If they are sugar coated and they're not reflected in these documents and in these summits, then we're going to have a much bigger issue. And I think, as cheesy as it might sound, I do agree with, because I was also looking at the comments, I do agree with Evans in the sense of what Evans said, was one of the participants here. He said, actions start with us. For me, my parting shot would be, action starts with us. We are Africans. We are capable. We have the resources. Yes, we do understand that there are major issues. There may be major issues in terms of the African Union, but the African Union is there for us to utilize. It's a start. It's a good start if they are empowered correctly, if they're empowered in the right way, in order for them to be able to implement, the Agenda 2063, then Africa will rise. For Africa can rise, and we can do it. And I will end on that cheesy note in the sense of saying that, I have a book called Perfect Landing, Wrong Airport. And I kept on thinking about how appropriate that is, because perfect landing means means simply that we have all these amazing policies in place, all these ideas, these amazing policies in place, but it's a wrong airport because implementation does not reflect those policies. So it's time for Africa to rise. Thank you so much.
Pan-Africanist Ndugu Emanyedere on the line, please. Welcome, welcome, welcome. Give us your take.
Greeting everyone. Thank you for the introduction and all the contribution from other participants. My perspective on how Africa speaks as one in global economic governance going forward is that Africa needs to address two of what I consider to be two of its gravest challenge in the today. And one is the lack of personal freedom and a dignified human existence, as well as lack of sustainable economic advancement for most of its people. Africans, we all know, suffers two devastating catastrophe in the past. As we all know, we can go back to the history. As we all know, being sold and bought like non-human merchandise so as to work on other people's plantation like beasts of burden, as well as being colonized and thus treated us as they could not, we could not govern ourselves. African then fought to regain their freedom and human dignity after regaining their freedom in the 1960s and 70s, and finally the end of apartheid in the 90s, which is not very far. They have found themselves having to fight to be free personally as individuals in independent African countries, as well as having a sustainable economic advancement as individuals and nations in the global jungle where strong swallow the weak instead of the strong helping the weak to be strong, as the Ubuntu wisdom of African ancestors preached. So beyond the welcome prestige of the G20 as South African hosting, Africa needs to revisit its commitment to the unity and prosperity of its people, which was the basis of its fight for the freedom from the slave trade, colonialism, including apartheid. Africa needs to revisit. I repeat, Africa needs to revisit its commitment to the unity and prosperity of its people, which was the basis of its fight for freedom from the slave trade and colonialism, and including apartheid. So Africa sought to speak with one voice in making demands about how the global economic governance architecture is built up. We are making demands. Africa, through its leaders at the summit, which I didn't see it so far as we expected, through his leaders at his summit, made an effort in demanding the reparation, not so-called donor aid, ought to be granted to Africa. And this is right, but at home, on the continent. Those in position of leadership ought to remind themselves of the need to ensure that the fruits of African liberation from old and new colonialism are enjoyed by all, not just those placed closest to the seats of post-colonial state power. This is the only way Africa can address its endemic twin problems of the lack of personal freedom and dignified human existence, as well as the lack of sustainable economic advancement for the majority of African people. That's the only thing that needs to be done. And also, my perspective, and especially what Dr. Ahonsi said, I love it so much. He said, we don't want others to make a decision for us. So if we don't want others to make a decision for us, as Ambassador Carlos was very angry about, then we must stand on what we have. We must know we are powerful, we have the natural resource, and we have human capital. The only thing we are lacking, we can also even build up and invent or whatever. It's the money, the paper money and coin. But others, all other important necessary things we have. The natural resource, we have the human capital. So I think as Africans, this G20 was just helping us to just more awakening, yes, but also to open our eyes and see and realize how powerful we are and how we can go forward. And I love what Ambassador Carlos said, that the African Union as our vehicle, as the vehicle of this continent in the global world, needs to focus on correcting what we need to correct, needs to fix our own issues, our internal issues. We have many. We need to fix them because respect are earned, are not just given. And especially for powerful people like us, respect are earned. So they need this vehicle needs to they need to not only to revisit like all of us, but also to focus on correcting what we need to correct. We can't continue begging, as Ambassador Carlos say. So that's my perspective. We need to remind our vehicle, African Union, all the time in anywhere we are. We need to remind them, and we need to also realize that how powerful we are. And I think we can do this. We can do this. So, and it's the time, because as you can see in the African continent, there's the revolutionary spirit, and especially for our youth. And we have 70% of youth in the continent. It means that's the group of people, human beings who are, more than other groups. So we also need to start now. And I think we need to start now as just an individual, wherever we are, but also as a nation and our leaders. We must just come forward and speak about it, but not only speak, because we are done talking. We must just not only speaking, also doing it. Wherever you are, you do something about it. So next time, if it will be next time, because also I heard about South African being not one of, that shows you that it's just intimidate us. We cannot be intimidated. We are powerful. We have to find a way, just as human being in this world, just to be involved in everything, because we have actually a lot necessary that human being needs more than any other continent. So that's my perspective, and thank you so much.
Thank you so much for that. And finally, last but not least, we have Madam Queen Mother of the Leading Women of Africa, Madeleine Nkunu. Welcome, welcome, welcome.
That the G20 held on the African soil for the first time is a profoundly symbolic, as it represents the turning point in the architecture of the global governance, and the moment that confirms the continent re-emergence of its power, or as a shaping force in the global affairs. But also I was saying that even the absence of the US at the summit, it carries symbolic weight as it reflects how the global table is shifting by itself without fight, and how the center of gravity is, in a global cooperation is moving. It's also at the same time the presence of major world power gathered on the African soil all together in one. For me, it marks the arrival of a new era, the Africa's era of visibility, agency, and global leadership. And more importantly, yes, there are some negatives and all that, but let's first applaud the fact that Africa has demonstrated that it is capable of influencing and even guiding the world future. But also, for me, the South African presidency embracing that responsibility with clarity by inviting the other African head of states and continental institutions. So it really affirmed, it was for me an affirmation that the G20 was not only a moment for South Africa, but it was a moment for the entire continent. So, and hosting, in absence of the US, I think somebody have said, this was really a moment that created a space, a political space for African leaders to speak into the global agenda directly, confidently, but also somehow collectively, though it might not be to the level that we would have wanted it. So for me, I think really South Africa used its presidency to reposition Africa's priorities as a global priorities. They've always been there. Like it has been said, I'm not taking away from really what everybody have said. I think they're all true and correct. But just that repositioning of the Africa's priority into the global priority as global priority, for me, that was really, really significant. But also, yes, we are talking about declarations and we are talking about commitments and so on. And we know, we are aware, and thank you to one of the speakers that say they are not binding. These commitments are not binding. However, as we can read through it as a global document. This is not just an African document. It is a global document. It bears African footprint across, transformative sectors, the industrialization and value addition, including critical minerals, infrastructure, the just energy transition, energy access, food security, agriculture, climate, digital transformation, the AI innovation, financing for development, women and youth. And I think for me, that is very, very important. So I think really the outcome demonstrated some kind of intentional leadership from President Ramaphosa, who really wanted his theme was solidarity, equality, and sustainability. For me, if I just look at maybe from just high level, that solidarity of looking at this is Africa's moment, that was very, very important for me. Just to make sure that he has brought together around him all his counterparts around the continent. It's really, it's assured me that these principles, were actually there on the table to shape the negotiations somehow. Like everyone else have alluded to, the real test begins. The post G20. This is where it starts. So Africa now is really faced with a challenge to continue to position itself after G20 Summit, because the event is gone. All the highlights, the media, it's gone. We are now face to face with our reality. And I will look at first the competitive advantage that Africa has on G20, since we're talking about G20. South Africa being a full member of G20, that is one. Number two, the African Union holding a permanent seat in G20. And we know that, yes, G20, does G20 has teeth, really? We don't know. Is it another UN? We don't know. Sorry. And I think maybe we know, but we are trying. At least this is the moment where we wanted to show our position. And I think we really did show it. So for me, that dual representation, it can actually help Africa to leverage on it strategically. So I think Africa needs to continue
to champion the Ubuntu diplomacy, because this is really, like everyone have said, this is an amazing concept that is value-based, and Ms. Nyerere had just invited us to revisit those commitments of Ubuntu. So we need to continue that. This is our identity as Africans. It's a value-based approach. It emphasizes solidarity, humanity, justice, and equitable cooperation. And I think for me, that is the key. The key is that we need to look at ourselves as equal. Like Carlos says, I love your passion and your, just your power, Carlos. Yes, we do not expect that the West will respect us now. But we need actually to position ourselves and to consider ourselves that we are equal. If they look at us as equal, that is another point. But we first need to look at ourselves as equal because we are bringing something to the table. So the AU permanent seat at the G20, really, it's supposed to be a continuity or institutional continuity, and also a long-term influence. Yes, already this morning we're hearing that the US will not invite South Africa, and I hear what Carlos was saying this morning. Well, why they don't want Africa to sit at the table, at the global table where decisions are being made. And I think that way we need to stand ourselves. We need to believe that we are leaders and we can actually lead the world. And we need to position ourselves as a global leader, because I think as we've been just, I think everyone was talking right now, if we continue to be at the receiving end and we're still putting our hand up, give me, even the AU being funded externally, it's not on. And that's why they continue to disrespect us. We know that the AU has Agenda 2063, and we are actually closer to 2063 that we could think in 1963 when it started. 100 years is almost around the corner. But I think as AU, and I believe that this G20 being a moment to reawaken, a moment to re-emerge, maybe, who knows, maybe the AU will now stand up and align now the Agenda 2063 to the commitment of the world. Do we need to do that? Maybe yes, maybe no. But we're talking just from the point of view that we are part of the global agenda. We also understand that development does not happen in isolation. It always needs a concerted effort. So yes, and we do agree, and I would agree with everyone that has spoken before me, that in our shelves around the continent, our shelves are full of excellent, beautiful policies, but our implementation gap continue to widen. It continued to widen. So I think this is really the moment, this is really my reflection on G20, where we are challenging now African leaders, and someone has spoken about accountability. It's really a moment that we need to have an African-driven accountability. Is it just because of G20 commitment? No, it is really overall commitment that African governments, including the AU, have given to the people of this continent. It will be time right at this moment, as someone has said, that it's really a moment of reflection. It was a moment to really realize a realization that we are actually part of the global agenda. And I will really just kind of recommend that this commitment, number one, it requires political political will. I know as they were making those declarations, there seemed to be some political will, but that will not happen unless there is an African-driven accountability where we hold our leaders accountable. So where we want to see strong leadership, we want to see corporate sector engagement, we want to see civil society. And I think that's where my heart is. Civil society, we need to arise and just hold our leaders accountable. And like everyone else have said, continental coordination. I love what someone put in the group, the Africa 54 Summit. You know, why can't we have that? And that is the continental coordination. Furthermore, as I try to conclude, I think Africa needs to strengthen its African common position, just like Ms. Nyerere has just told us, where we need to revisit the commitments that were put by our forefathers, where we need to redefine how to consolidate these positions of global negotiations, whether we're negotiating with G20, with COP, with IMF, with World Bank, with the World Trade Organization, the UN. We need to have that African common position, and everybody, I'm just agreeing with everybody what they've said. We need to be able to speak with one voice, so I think for us really speaking with one voice, it's both really a political necessity and geopolitical opportunity. Really, we really cannot continue. It cannot continue to be business as usual. It's really time for us to awake. Number one, if Africa can actually strengthen their common position, number one, it will enable the continent to negotiate decisively, okay, especially when it comes to protecting the natural resources that we have. And that will prevent the proxy wars, the proxy conflict that we're having on the continent, which are driven by the competition for African minerals. That will only happen when Africa stand on one common position and one voice. So as we continue to witness the war in Eastern DRC, in Sudan, in Nigeria, in everywhere else in Africa, where do you think those wars are coming? Who is equipping those rebels? Those ammunition are not coming from Africa. They're coming from somewhere. But if we as Africans, if our leaders could stand with one common position, it will enable them to really start making those decisions as one voice. Number two, the common African position will just allow Africa to strengthen its stance of democratization. We've signed up for democracy. Well, it's not me, and I don't think it's youth of today. But we've signed up for democracy. Yet in Africa, the principle of democracy are not adhered to. They're not being applied. Our democracies in Africa need to reflect the African values of Ubuntu and not compromise on the very same principles that our leaders have actually committed to. As we can see, the recent development in Cameroon, in Cote d'Ivoire, it's really raising fundamental questions about the continent accountability to democratic principles to which they have committed to. So weak governance on the continent, it can only lead to instabilities. Many coups that they are condemning in Africa, as we are witnessing up to now, even yesterday there was one, they are actually just a mere symptoms of deeper failures to uphold democratic principles. Failures that disproportionately are harming our women and youth. As we can see across Africa and Sudan, you can't open the TV without your tears flowing down your eyes when you look at what is happening. Let's get to women and youth. For me, they are central to Africa's future. Women and youth. And even as we are talking about the implementation of G20 commitment, and it's not only G20 commitment, there's so many, like one of speakers have mentioned, piles and piles of commitments, of regulations, of policies that are piling up and collecting dust. But we are now just requesting that how can we implement those? The implementation to all those commitments will not happen if women and youth are not on the table. And let's remember, when it comes to these commitments from G20 or from any global powers, remember that no one will implement them but Africans. If we don't ratify them within our different countries, if we don't implement them, nothing will happen because it's not of interest of global powers to implement them. And women and youth now become very, very important. As someone have just said, youth represent over 70% of the African population. So it's really just time. And for me, I would just call on women to unite. Women need to unite, to collaborate, to position themselves as credible partners for development. So women need to prepare, need to organize, to lead, because really when global powers or global partners come to Africa, they are increasingly looking for capable African counterparts. On youth, my call will be that they need to equip themselves with the skills that the economy will be needed. The skills that the minerals need, the technology need, the agriculture need, and all the new industries, they need to position themselves for the opportunities instead of dying to look for greener pasture in Europe or somewhere else where the doors actually are being closed. We are calling on youth. This is Africa's moment, as everyone has said. And we need to be unapologetic, as everyone has before me have said. It's really time, as I conclude, that as we structure this follow-up, and I think there's more questions than answers to all these commitments and declarations that have been put in place, as we prepare ourselves for those commitments, we need to organize ourselves. We need to hold our leaders accountable. We need to call on their political will and unified leadership as a continent. We will not be able to achieve even the Agenda 2063 or even just implement what we are doing if, the commitments that were done during G20 and prior to G20, why they're not implemented, because we are speaking with 54 voices instead of speaking with one voice. So it's really about time that we promote that inclusion of all Africans, and our leaders need to know they are not the ones who will implement. It's actually the African people that will implement those resolutions. The African people in the land and those in diaspora. So Africa will not only re-emerge as we do that, it will not only re-emerge as a global leader, but it will become unavoidable on a global table. Even if they don't invite us, they will be needed. So thank you so much, and let's get ready as we shape the world future. Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Madeline Mkunu, our Queen Mother. It is unavoidable Africa must reawaken and reemerge as a global leader. Great, 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 great ending. And so we've run out of time, but I wanted our speakers that are here, because Dr. Ella had to leave and Madam Boats had to leave as well. So if we can just give one closing statement in less than a minute, and let's just talk about action when it comes to accountability. What is your idea of what accountability looks like in 1 minute? And we'll start with Dr. Moore Roberts.
Thank you so much for that. Accountability means a lot to me, but on a very different level. The one thing that we keep talking about is having collaborative effort. We all need to collaborate across Africa and have one voice. My challenge with that is that reality tells us that when it comes to collaboration, you cannot reject the people that you do not want when it suits you. Inclusivity and diversity is something that should be a no-brainer and second nature, but we're still fighting for it. Look at xenophobia, look at how we treat each other in the African countries, one against the other. For me, my reality is, why don't we clean up our own houses first before we aim to collaborate for global impact? G20, yes, I agree. It was stunning that it happened here, and it's symbolic that it started on African ground, which means that we can use this as a stepping stone for what we want, don't want, and what we can do differently. And I knew that because we're running out of time, I'll just put it into the chat. There are some deliverables. But then we always talk about we need to hold our leaders accountable, but who? We don't understand who. When we get off platforms like this, we don't even know who we're going to talk to, who we're going to connect with. When we connect with each other, we'll talk about our own projects and what we want. We ask, who do you know that's going to fund me and sponsor me? Our conversations are fickle. It's biased towards what we want as individuals, not how we need to work together as a collaborative. So sometimes these conversations are stunning and useless at the same time, if that makes sense, because we don't have one way of thinking of how do we connect and now create an African G20. How do we get Africa together and all those countries together and start talking in a way that is inclusive? We talk about grassroots. Half of the people have not even set foot in a rural area in donkey's years. That's a reality. We talk about women in rural areas. We talk about youth and women, but how many of us actually include them in our everyday lives? Decision making. How many of us actually do that in a way that actually shows that we are also doing what we say? Our words and actions need to match, which means that as individuals, we need to be values driven as well. So for me, collaboration means that we start on these platforms and have the right discussions with the right people, not the ones that still do what we said we don't enjoy. Our leaders having beautiful conversations and speeches, and then it's useless in terms of implementation. So my thinking going forward in terms of taking action is bring people together to start to create tangible solutions, and then bring those solutions to the people who are meant to be implementing and support them and guide them in what we want as a collaborative voice. That's my 2 cents worth. Thank you.
Thank you so much. And so focusing on collaboration, and one powerful thing you said was we must know who we must need to speak to. And that's all over the world. People don't know who they're supposed to be speaking to. So thank you so much for. So we'll move to Ambassador Carlos Boachi, your final thoughts and the answer to accountability moving forward from the G20 Summit in 1 minute.
Hello, am I audible?
Yes.
Yeah,
Yes.
just a quick one. We have issues with accountability on this continent. Early this year, the UN did a report during the UN political high-level dialogue, and it was clear. We borrowed $2.8 trillion last year as African countries went and borrowed $2.8 trillion. But when it was time for accountability, they were only able to account for only 1.4 trillion. So basically, 50% of the money they borrowed can't be accounted for. So that itself is a big issue. Why they always disrespect us. Because when we come in there, we ask money, they give it to us. We don't even hold anybody accountable. And one of the conversation I was having with Dr. Zuma was accountability. It's not the government's responsibility to hold itself accountable. It's the citizen responsibility to hold its government accountable. So my last statement is, and one thing I also need to also chip in is media warfare, right? 80% of the media flow about Africa are not being generated by Africa. I get to know about Africa through CNN, BBC, Al Jazeera. Those are not African content. Those are not African media stations. Why don't we have a Pan-African media houses that are broadcasting Africa? When I flew over, last week I went to Morocco and I flew over Niger, Mali, and the rest, and I was seeing how beautiful African are if we leverage on just our tourist attraction site. That alone is a trillion dollar money generation for continent. There were some beautiful places I saw in Niger that you can't find it elsewhere, even in Europe. That can boost tourism, but who's promoting it? So until we start holding our leaders accountable, promoting Pan-Africanism and promoting our identity, because sometimes we talk as, and I'm going to quote Dr. Zuma's quote. I remember when she asked me, where are you from? And I said, I'm from Ghana. She was like, no, you're not from Ghana. Say you are an African living in Ghana. You are an African living in South Africa. We need to have an African identity first before our national identity. Because our national identity were given by them, but our unity. And it will shock you. This conversation we are having here, I'm having the same conversation in Morocco. I'm having the same conversation in Kenya. So we have a voice. We have a voice. Let's unite and let's build Africa we want. Thank you.
Ambassador Carlos Boachi, thank you. Dr. Ahunsi, your closing remarks, and what does accountability look like post G20 Summit? Dr. Sunny?
Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
I'm actually on the move. Yes, it have been an interesting talks this morning about the responsibility of African seat on the G20. Well, it's much easier to speak than to take action. I think the action rests on the African leaders themselves. It is not about the G20. It's not about China. It's not about America. Within, the issue need to be addressed. The issue of failed leadership, the issue of failed system. Once all these are addressed and the rule of law has actually taken its course in every part of the African continent, then we're moving forward. Yes, it is easy to say the citizens should hold the people in authority to, well, you can only do that if you have the power and the means, because people in power use what I call the B and B and B, bullying, bullets, and brutal. So where this is actually a formidable force against the citizen, then they're powerless. It is not the crowd that matters, it's the weapon that they have at their disposal. And as we all know, this is not anything to be hidden. Political systems are not on the golden platform whereby people are really voting the right leaders into the helm. So this information that we have had today, how does it get to the leaders? Who are at the point, who are the main DMU, decision-making units? So it is vital that accountability should start from the African themselves, not from the outside world.
Thank you, Dr. Sunny Ahunsi. Thank you. And we will end with our Queen Mother, Madam Madeleine Mkunu.
Right. So Africa has 1.4 billion people. We really cannot make anyone accountable if 1.4 billion people are talking. We need to unite. Collaboration is actually the key. And like everyone has said, it starts in Africa. It starts at home. I love the statement. I am an African living in South Africa. If we can start by that, and every young people can say that, we can start seeing Africa united and not divided. Thank you.
Thank you. And closing out everything, I just want to send a thank you note. We are concluding this powerful 5-part leader, Women of Africa G20 Conversation Series. I wish to extend my deepest appreciation to all of our distinguished speakers, our organizing partners from LONI, and every participant who has joined us, contributed, and engaged with such passion and clarity of purpose. I love that we saw diverse representation, diverse perspectives, and this was able to, and not everyone agreed. And I think that's what is important for us to move forward, to grow, and to prosper. So thank you all for being authentic with your input. Your insights, your questions, and reflections have enriched this dialogue and affirmed what we know to be true. African women are ready to shape global governance, influence geopolitical debates, and drive the business and development agenda of our continent. To our speakers, thank you for bringing your expertise, your conviction, and your commitment to elevating Africa's voice at the global table. To Loni, thank you for your collaboration and unwavering support throughout this journey. And to all participants, thank you for your dedication over these 5 sessions, for showing up consistently, and for sharing your perspectives that continue to strengthen our collective voice. Throughout this series, every recommendation and key message has been captured and regularly forwarded to policymakers and decision makers at national, regional, and global levels. Your contributions are not simply conversations. This is not a talk shop. They have become part of the policy ecosystem, shaping Africa's engagement with the G20 and beyond. All session recordings are now available on the Beyond Boundaries YouTube channel, ensuring that the knowledge we have generated together continues to circulate and inspire others. As we move forward, I encourage you to stay connected and keep an eye on our upcoming dialogues. African women are rising, amplifying their voices and asserting their leadership in global affairs, geopolitics, governance, and business. This series is not an ending, but simply a beginning of a much larger movement. Thank you once again for your presence, your contributions, and your commitment to Africa's transformation and prosperity. Together we move beyond boundaries, and you all enjoy the rest of your day. It's been my pleasure, Nanette Eto'ahene, to be your moderator, and look forward to connecting with you offline. Take care.